This is my sermon for Sunday, August 2nd. You can find it online. I will note that though I'm going to be reading from the Gospel, I'm also going to be referring a little bit to some of the first reading, which is from Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 31. You might want to read that on your own. The Gospel is Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 21. Now, when Jesus heard about the death of John the Baptist, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away, so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You have given them something to eat." "You give them something to eat." The disciples replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And Jesus said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate, were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Please join me in prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I realized I intended the stole. I'll just do it now. When I read this story, there are a few things that strike me. First off, it can be very easy to try to say that Jesus is like God in this part, or like a human in that part. It can be very easy for us as humans to want to say that this section or that section of the gospel is more or less like one aspect of his personality. What the church proclaims is something that my mind has trouble grasping, but I can still proclaim it. I don't understand how it is, but I know that it is. And that is that Jesus is both fully human and fully divine. That he is like us, born of a woman. He went through puberty. He probably had zits. And he is of God. He is God's child. He can do things that, quite frankly, I and you cannot do. There are elements in this section that are of both. And I think they reveal to us the nearness and the compassion of God. This section begins immediately after we hear how John the Baptist was gruesomely put to death, his head literally on a platter. And Jesus, we are told, when he heard about this, needed some time alone. He takes a boat and he withdraws by himself. Many of us, when someone we love or care about dies, when we get some bad news, when we are grieving, need some time alone by ourselves to grieve, to sit, to ponder, to mourn. This text reminds us that Jesus, though he was the Son of God, needed some time to mourn. And this text reminds us that when Jesus saw the crowds, his first reaction is an emotional one. He sees that they are like sheep without a shepherd. They are leaderless. They are without a guide. He has compassion and solace and mercy. And he heals their sick. Compassion is God's first response to need. The disciples see these people, see that there is nothing for them to eat, says to Jesus, send them home. Jesus responds to their human need by filling that human need. Food is a need. And Jesus and God takes a very little bit of food and makes there be an overabundance. I cannot do that. I cannot take 5 loaves and 2 fish and make it into 12 overflowing baskets. God can. This text reminds us that Jesus is both one of us and of the stuff and the child of God, that Jesus is both our brother and God. This text reminds us that our God gets down, hunkers down in the dirt with us, cries when we cry, grieves when we grieve, responds to our need with compassion and action, and gives us what we need and more than what we need. When food passes through the hands of Christ, there is more than enough to go around. When we come to Christ, heads bowed, hearts broken, in need of mercy and solace, Jesus responds in compassion. We might not always understand. We might not always comprehend. We might be proclaiming the words of the creed that we don't fully believe or accomplish ourselves. But we recognize that we don't do it, but that God works through us. We might struggle with God as Jacob did in Genesis 32 as he wrestles with God. We might have doubts, anxieties, worries, fears. We might have remembrances of past sins, current sins, or brokenness of those things that we have done or left undone. It is reflective. It is an honest, reflective vulnerability, I think, that Jacob's name is changed to Israel and that this becomes the name of a nation. For struggling with God is surely something that we all must do. We all must have times that we say, why did this happen? Why didn't that happen? Why are we living in this time? What can we do? We can do as Jesus has shown. He who is the firstborn of the dead, the great shepherd of the sheep, he took time when he needed it to grieve. If you need time to grieve, to mourn, to pray, take that time. When he saw those in need, he responded in compassion and mercy. And so you too might in this time ponder how you can show compassion and mercy. You might consider praying for others, reaching out to others, giving of your time, talent, or treasure. You might think, oh, I know someone who is in need of food. I know someone who might need a place to stay. I might know someone who needs a mask. I might know someone who needs a phone call or a message. You can respond in compassion and mercy. You can know that God is showering you with compassion too. And you can recognize that the Lord of the living and the dead, that the one who promises resurrection and new life, is not just promising something for the future, though God is, but is alive and active and at work in our here and now, so that in our here and now, God's kingdom might be revealed, a kingdom where there is more than enough to go around. Amen.